After studying the weather conditions that had prevailed over 50 years, and studying the atomic fallout and the deposit, nerve gas deteriorates very quick. 48 hours, it loses its deadly characteristics, and an invading army could move into a place that had been sprayed in 48 hours. But there is a residue which collects in the clouds and is brought to Earth the same as what atomic fallout is by precipitation, rain. Now, in 1955, the year that I was starting to publish these two books, the scientists had reached the conclusion that one part of the world that was safe was that area bounded by southern Florida, the islands of the Caribbean Sea, and the British West Indies. As soon as that was secretly known, all the big multi-millionaires started the most intense building operations this country has ever known. The chairman of the Aluminum Company of America, Mr. Davis, bought 10,000 acres on the Isle of Pines and proceeded to turn it into one of the most luxurious hideaways where he and his top-level members of the Illuminati could live in peace and luxury while we were wiping each other off the face of the earth. Britain was so concerned about the increase of population in the West Indies that they financed the movement of around 250,000 West Indians out of the islands and moved them into England and Canada, paid their fares, and told them it was to improve their conditions. Now, A.P. Taylor, who owns and controls the brewery interests of Canada, Hoffman, Bronfman, who controls all the distillers in Canada, and who are no more Jews or Zionists than what I am, but they control the movement at the top, and a group of their international gangsters that control the Canadian government's policy just as another group controls yours. They formed a syndicate. The first ante was $15 million, and they started to build palatial resorts throughout the West Indies and other islands of the Caribbean Sea. A bunch of your Chicago financiers and others extended Miami right down until it reaches now to Key West. All this happened after it's been called the safe area. It's a good job my nurse, when I was a kid, dropped me on my head, because she developed such a bump of curiosity that I've never recovered from it yet. And knowing what was in the wind, I had to go down there and see for myself what was going on. That is what took me down to Florida in the February of 1957. And what did we find? They were organizing water transports between the islands. They were taking cargo ship loads of preserved and tinned foods and stockpiling them throughout the area. They were building great big water condensers so that in case of drought or lack of precipitation they could have the sea water turned into drinking water. Vining Davis was at the back of that reclamation program in which thousands and thousands of acres of marshland in Florida was drained and cultivated and tilled so it became fertile ground for growing what you call market vegetables, small fruits and vegetables. 200,000 headed cattle were transferred from Texas into the ranches of Florida so they would be sure of a meat supply. With that amount of cattle breeding and the fish that were available in the ocean and the coastal waters, they were quite satisfied that with their ability to grow their own fruit and vegetables, raise their own meat, catch their own fish, That added to the tremendous amount of staples, such as flour and other things that have been shipped into that area by ocean-going cargo vessels, would make them absolutely self-contained. Now, because these men always like to make a project pay for itself, they rented all this luxurious accommodation that was built in 55, 56 to tourists. And they were quite willing to take them for all they've got, make them pay through the nose for this luxurious living, and they were quite welcome to pay the shot until they wanted to move down in there. And they had it all planned, how to get rid of them so that they could occupy the vacated accommodation. They called the general strike of hotel employees. And all the people in those luxurious resorts couldn't get any kind of service, so the people that owned them were very apologetic, and they flew them all out. And as soon as they got rid of them, every plane leaving these northern airports were chartered to fly the big boys down in to take over the accommodation that had been vacated. My heavens, we had some of my friends keeping a record of who were chartering the planes and the people that were going on, just the same as we checked those that were landing at Georgia Airport for the St. Simon Island meeting. And amongst the people that had their own planes chartered to take them down south just before Christmas was the heads of your international unions that had done all the negotiations to amalgamate the unions at the top. Not only the American, but the Canadian. They both had private planes for the whole bunch of the top fellows who had been serving the international. And the Labour let them get away with it. Goodness gracious me, I don't know how stupid people can get. It's so obvious. And then, when the whole thing was ready, and somebody was going to press the button, the Lord entered into the picture and took a stand. And you never saw the like of it in all your born days. I've traveled all over the world and I never saw anything like it. All of a sudden, just towards the end of November, the earliest and most severe frost that had struck Florida in 50 years hit, and the papaya trees just wilted. They rushed out, covered them with blankets, covered them with anything. Didn't do any good. They were flat on the ground. Next day, every blessed one was wiped out. The fruit and vegetables that were just getting to maturity for the Christmas market were wiped out completely. There wasn't an onion or a radish or a lettuce left. And the rain started to fall, and the wind started to blow from every direction other than was expected. And there was such complete chaos as far as weather conditions were concerned that they fired the poor little meteorologist at Tampa because he couldn't call the shots 12 hours in advance. So they fired him, and they brought the top fella down from Washington. And when he got down there, all he did was hold his head, and he couldn't predict what the weather was going to be for 24 hours. So they had to call the war off. Too bad. Oh, we were just saying. They called the war off. They only postponed it for a while. They thought that these weather conditions couldn't prevail much longer. And you know, there was such a precipitation of rain that the fallout in Florida, both nuclear fallout and chlorine, was such that 76,000 head of cattle died. 76,000 head of cattle died. The next thing that happened, Christmas week came. You never saw such beautiful weather in your life. Everybody was down on the beaches swimming and bathing. For 7 days we had perfect weather. Then the angels pulled out the plug again, and the water came down, and the wind started to blow, and the temperature was all around. I was fortunate. I was so convinced that something like this would happen. I had a great big hand-knitted woolen coat, and you know I've been stopped a dozen times on the street by people who said, I'll give you $40 for that coat. Everybody thought I was nuts when I went down there with a great big hand-knitted coat. But boys, I was comfortable when other people were freezing to death. And then the second frost wiped out the next crop just as it was ready for market. And the cattle started to starve to death. There wasn't enough grass left on the pasture land, and before they could organize an emergency feeding program, they had to pull the grapefruit crop and take those great big wagons that carry about 10 tons and dump them in the pastures, and the cattle were so hungry they just munched grapefruit to keep alive. And that is a truth, and there's thousands of people can support that statement. Then, the most mysterious thing of the whole episode happened. The fish that were so abundant in the coastal waters, in the islands and around the coast, they disappeared to the Lord knows where, and He won't tell. You couldn't catch enough fish in a couple of hours to supply 5 or 6 families, and when the fishing boats would go out and bring great big cargoes of lovely fish in, they couldn't find the fish. They even put electronic devices in their boats and went out 300 miles to sea to try and locate the fish shoals. No good. 40% of those that owned commercial fishing boats and charter boats went bankrupt, and the financiers took over their boats. 40%. Then, just to make sure that there wouldn't be any nonsense, in the beginning of 1958, as the third crop was ready for the market, the Lord sent another frost and wiped that. It was the latest frost that's ever been recorded. So we poor suckers that were down there getting the information found ourselves paying 35 cents a head for lettuce and 29 for pieces of cucumbers and so on, all the way down the line. They even had to fly the food that we people needed there from California and Mexico, and all that's what happened down in Florida. But the scientists said that the fluorine that fell down was brought down out of the clouds by the rain, and that it is accumulated from the smoke from chemical factories, that the smoke had gone up and lodged in the clouds, and these unprecedented downpours of rain had released it and dropped it on the grass and the pasture. Well, I don't believe that, because I know that they were frantically taking tests of Spanish moss and every other thing. I had doctors that I could rely on, and they were watching all these tests, and they just did not know what was to happen.